After my dad passed away, I took on the responsibility of supporting my family. But when my sister went through a breakup, our mom used the money I'd saved to buy a car that would cut down my 3-hour commute to take my sister to a luxury wellness retreat, leaving only a note behind. A week later, when they returned, they were shocked to find the house emptied out, and now they're bombarding my phone because they apparently can't even afford groceries. I'm the eldest in my family, with a younger sister named Kiki. Being the older sibling, I've been financially supporting my family since my dad's death. To provide some background, 4 years ago, my dad was killed in a hit-and-run accident. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. To make matters worse, the person responsible for his death was never caught, leaving us grappling with both immense grief and frustration over the lack of justice. When he passed, my dad was the sole breadwinner for our family, and we struggled to keep things afloat. At the time, I was just about to graduate from college, so I immediately began searching for a job. Fortunately, I managed to secure stable employment right after graduating. My mom, who had never worked outside the home before, found it extremely difficult to find a job, especially while dealing with her grief. I assured her that I would handle things even though I was mourning myself. I knew I had to set aside my feelings and focus on providing for our family. That's how, from a very young age, I ended up shouldering all the household responsibilities. Initially, my salary was sufficient to cover expenses for myself, my mom, and my sister. However, as time went on and their financial needs grew, it became clear that supporting the household, funding Kiki's needs, and helping my mom required more than just a regular 9-to-5 job. To make ends meet, I started working overtime and took on additional part-time jobs to bring in extra income. There hasn't been a single day when I've been able to truly rest or take time off work because I simply can't afford to. As a result, I've often felt completely drained, but the weight of knowing my family depends on me keeps me moving forward. It's been incredibly challenging, and there are moments when I wonder how much longer I can sustain this pace. But the sense of duty I feel toward providing for my family in my dad's absence has always been a powerful motivator. Kiki, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. She contributes nothing to the household. She works as a spiritual teacher, a career that, while meaningful, doesn't provide any significant financial relief for our family. I respect her dedication and the passion she has for her work. But the reality is that her income doesn't meet our financial needs. She doesn't have many clients, and the few she does have pay her very little. I've tried talking to her about considering a different career path, but she insists that being a spiritual teacher is her true calling. Meanwhile, Kiki constantly demands money from me for whatever she needs. This difference in our perspectives and responsibilities has led to frequent arguments between us. I didn't mind helping her when she was younger, but now that she's an adult, I need her to step up and use the money I give her more wisely. For instance, Kiki insists on buying only premium organic foods and exclusively shops at an expensive organic market where prices are nearly double what they are at regular grocery stores. While I value healthy eating, I don't think it's fair for her to make such costly choices at my expense, especially when she could opt for more budget-friendly options. On top of that, Kiki insists on regular beauty treatments, like getting manicures almost every week. She often asks me for $300 or more to cover these services, including hair treatments. Whenever I refuse to fund her lifestyle, she argues that, as her older sister, I should support her unconditionally instead of trying to control her. If I continue to say no, she takes out her frustration on our mom. She'll yell at her and sometimes even steal cash from her purse, the same money I give my mom to cover household expenses. This often leaves my mom short on funds and coming to me for more money, which only adds to my burden. My mom, caught between the two of us, has tried to reason with Kiki on multiple occasions. she's gently suggested that Kiki find a steady job, or at least work part-time to contribute financially while pursuing her spiritual teaching. However, despite these discussions, Kiki has shown no interest in changing her approach. Her insistence on living a lifestyle that doesn't match our financial reality has only deepened the strain on our family, leaving me to shoulder the majority of the burden on my own. Now, let me explain the recent incident that brought me to Reddit today. Kiki had been dating a guy who, from what I observed, was unreliable and not trustworthy. He would string her along without ever acknowledging her as his girlfriend publicly. He also frequently spent time with other women behind her back. Eventually, Kiki caught him with one of these so-called friends. When she confronted him, he denied doing anything wrong and refused to apologize. Their argument quickly escalated and turned physical. Feeling deeply hurt and betrayed, Kiki punched him in the face and began throwing some of his belongings around the room. She even threatened to harm him and the other women he was involved with. This situation spiraled so out of control that the neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. When the officers arrived, they saw that Kiki had been the one to act violently. Because of the damage she caused and the physical assault, she was arrested. Fortunately, the guy chose not to press charges, and since it was her first offense, the officers let her off with a warning. I thought such a dramatic experience might make Kiki reflect on her actions and possibly change for the better. Rather than showing any remorse or acknowledging the turmoil she'd caused, Kiki remained unapologetic. In fact, she insisted she had acted appropriately, openly stating she had no regrets about how she handled the situation and believed her actions were justified given the circumstances. Since her breakup, Kiki has done little more than sulk around the house, using her heartbreak as an excuse to avoid taking on any responsibility. Instead of trying to move forward or take control of her life, she has fallen deeper into a reckless lifestyle. Most days, she spends her time going out with friends to various bars and clubs, returning late at night completely intoxicated, often bringing strangers home with her. I've tried talking to her, hoping a heartfelt conversation might help her realize the harm she's doing to herself and the chaos she's bringing into our lives. But she dismisses my concerns, acting as though I'm overreacting and exaggerating the situation. This week, my mom pulled me aside to talk about Kiki while she was out, giving us a rare chance to discuss her freely. Mom confided that she was becoming genuinely worried about Kiki's behavior, revealing something that took me by surprise. She had recently discovered that Kiki had started using drugs. I had assumed my sister only drank excessively or smoked weed occasionally, but learning she was now using drugs was alarming. It also explained why she had been asking me for increasingly larger sums of money every week. Mom shared her fear that Kiki's destructive behavior could escalate even further if left unchecked. She insisted that we needed to intervene before things got any worse. I agreed with her and suggested we look into professional help for Kiki, rehab, therapy, or counseling, anything that might provide her with the support she clearly needed. I pointed out that our own attempts to help her had been ineffective, with every effort ending in arguments or her brushing us off. However, Mom was hesitant about involving professionals. She strongly believed that it was our responsibility as a family to help Kiki and didn't want to leave her care in the hands of strangers. She then surprised me by mentioning that she'd already done some research on her own and found what she believed to be the perfect solution. The retreat allowed participants to bring a companion, and Mom felt it would be the ideal way to spend quality time with Kiki in a therapeutic environment. I was stunned, not just by the idea, but by the sheer impracticality of it. How could we possibly afford something so extravagant? With my income stretched thin between bills and family expenses, there was rarely any money left over. A week at a high-end retreat seemed entirely out of reach. We couldn't even afford a meal at a modest restaurant, let alone something like this. When I questioned how she intended to pay for it, Mom gently reminded me that I'd been saving for months to buy a used car. She suggested that I could use that money to fund the trip instead. I was overwhelmed by a mix of frustration and disbelief. I'd been diligently setting aside money for the car because it was a necessity for me. My commute to work currently takes nearly 3 hours each way, and having a car would drastically reduce my travel time and ease the exhaustion that comes with such a long daily journey. This wasn't just a convenience, it was an investment in our family's stability. A car would benefit all of us by cutting down on the costs and hassles of public transportation and ride shares. I explained all of this to my mom, emphasizing how important the car was for both me and our household. I told her I couldn't sacrifice my hard-earned savings for Kiki's retreat. But Mom was resolute. She insisted that Kiki needed this experience more than I needed the car. She argued that we couldn't stand by and do nothing, especially after losing Dad. She was deeply afraid of losing another loved one and believed the retreat could be life-changing for Kiki. I tried to reason with her, suggesting a more practical alternative, finding a local counselor or therapist for Kiki. This way, we wouldn't have to spend a significant amount on a retreat where Kiki might simply relax without addressing the real issues she needed to confront. I assured Mom that I would research reputable counselors and have a list of options ready by the end of the week. I urged her to have a heart-to-heart conversation with Kiki and encourage her to give therapy a try, since Kiki often disregards my suggestions. Mom didn't argue much after that, and I thought I had finally gotten through to her. You can imagine my shock and anger when I came home last night, exhausted from work, to find the house eerily quiet. Normally, when I walk in, Mom is either watching TV or reading a book. I called out for both Mom and Kiki, expecting them to appear, but the house was completely empty. No one answered, and there were no signs of anyone around. I figured they might have gone out to run errands or pick up groceries. When I walked into the kitchen, I noticed a note taped to the refrigerator in Mom's familiar handwriting. I pulled it off and read the message. "Sorry we couldn't wait for you. Kiki and I are on our way to the luxury retreat. I know you'll be upset, but honestly, money can always be earned back, and your sister's mental health comes first. We'll see you in a week." I stood there in disbelief, staring at the note, unable to process what I had just read. Overwhelmed with disbelief and anxiety, I rushed to my computer and logged into my bank account. Since Mom had access, I immediately checked my balance. A wave of shock hit me. Mom had withdrawn every last dollar of the money I had painstakingly saved for months. My savings were completely wiped out. The fact that my own mother could do something so awful left me feeling betrayed and helpless. I couldn't stop the tears from flowing as I stared at the screen, sobbing in frustration and disbelief. How could she take the money I worked so hard to save, money that was supposed to make my life easier, and use it to pay for a luxury retreat with my entitled sister? The only thing I could picture was the note she left on the fridge saying, "Money can always be earned back." How could she write that so casually, knowing I was the only one actually earning money in our household? Mom didn't work, Kiki didn't contribute, and I was the one sacrificing my time, energy, and future to keep us afloat. Now, after everything, they had taken my hard-earned savings for their getaway, leaving me to shoulder all the responsibilities alone. I've left Mom multiple voicemails, venting my anger and trying to make her understand the depth of how much she hurt me. She hasn't responded to a single one, choosing to avoid the confrontation entirely. As for Kiki, the only thing I received from her was a single infuriating text, a wink emoji. That's it. No apology, no explanation, just a smug little emoji, as if to say she couldn't care less about the pain I'm going through. This entire situation has left me feeling unsupported, betrayed, and completely alone in a family I've sacrificed everything for. I'm furious, Reddit. Am I wrong for being so angry at my mom and sister for what they did? Am I overreacting? Update 1. Thank you to everyone for your comments. They've really helped me reflect on the situation. I completely agree. My mom and sister have been taking advantage of my willingness to step up. Let me explain. When my dad passed away, I was devastated. In the midst of that grief, I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility to take care of my family. Being the only one with a job, I convinced myself it was my duty to ensure we were financially secure, even if it meant taking on more than my fair share. It was almost as if I thought providing for them would somehow fill the void Dad's absence left behind. Back then, I was so focused on keeping us afloat that I didn't realize how little effort they were putting in to support either me or themselves. But after what happened with my savings, everything has become painfully clear. Losing that money was a wake-up call. It made me see just how much they've taken me for granted. Mom and Kiki seem to think I'll always be there to fix their problems, but what about my own life? I've been working myself to exhaustion, while they continue to live without contributing financially or even expressing gratitude for my sacrifices. To those suggesting I report my mom to the police, I don't want to take that step. As angry and disappointed as I am, I don't want her to end up in jail. Instead, I've decided on a harsher consequence. I'm moving out. I could have left years ago, but I stayed because I felt they needed me. If I wasn't carrying the burden of their expenses, I could have a financially stable and secure life. I could spend my money on things I enjoy or invest in my own future. It's hard to admit, but I'm beginning to see that my loyalty to my family has come at the cost of my own happiness. I have a lot to think about tonight. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update. Thanks to all your strong advice and encouragement, I've finally taken action. The first thing I did was start packing up everything I owned from the house. I carefully gathered all the items I'd bought over the years: kitchen appliances, dishes, home decor, and countless other things I'd purchased to make our home functional and comfortable. I reached out to a close friend who kindly offered me a place to stay temporarily while I looked for an apartment. I made sure to leave before Mom and Kiki returned, leaving no note or explanation behind. I knew any discussion about my departure would fall on deaf ears. I wanted them to fully feel the impact of my absence without any warning. As expected, the moment they returned to find the house stripped of everything I had contributed, my phone was flooded with calls and voicemails from Mom. She kept asking where I was and what had happened to everything in the house. The irony wasn't lost on me. Only now, faced with an empty house and no one to rely on, did they finally start reaching out in desperation. After letting them stew for a few hours, I called Mom back. She immediately put me on speakerphone with Kiki beside her. Both demanded to know why I had left. Mom admitted she knew I was upset about her taking my savings, but tried to justify it, claiming Kiki felt much better after the retreat. She insisted I shouldn't still be angry. I calmly told her that I had moved out for good and they were now on their own. That's when they both started shouting. Mom said I should have talked to her before leaving the house like that. I reminded her that she and Kiki had taken every cent of my savings behind my back without even consulting me and spent it entirely on themselves. They hadn't answered my calls all week to avoid taking any accountability. Now that they were left without financial support, they wanted to talk? I told them I was done. They had made their choices and now they could deal with the consequences. Mom started pleading, saying I couldn't abandon them like this and that she was now willing to sit down and discuss things. But Kiki, in the background, was yelling even louder, accusing me of being selfish and punishing them by starving them and leaving them behind. She claimed all they had done was take a well-deserved break. Mom tried to guilt me by pointing out that half the kitchen appliances were gone and there was barely any food in the house. She said she understood my frustration but felt my reaction was over the top. She claimed I was throwing a fit for no reason and urged me to calm down and come back home. But for the first time I felt no guilt, no urge to fix things or make amends. Instead, I knew I was truly done, and that realization was liberating. This wasn't a tantrum. It was me finally standing up for myself and setting boundaries that had been ignored for far too long. When Mom promised that if I returned, she would never repeat the same mistake, I couldn't help but laugh. I told her plainly that I didn't care if she repeated her actions or not. I had already taken steps to protect myself. I removed her access to my bank account and made it clear that I wouldn't send them any more money or bail them out again. From now on, they were on their own. I reminded her that they still had the house Dad had left them, and if they wanted to keep their heads above water, they needed to find jobs and take responsibility immediately. Kiki, of course, started yelling, demanding to know how they were supposed to survive in the meantime without food or money. Mom, frustrated and desperate, began shouting as well, calling me selfish and stubborn, but I wasn't moved. I'd heard all their guilt-tripping before. I stayed calm, ignored their outbursts, and ended the call. Then, I blocked both of them from contacting me again. I won't lie, it felt incredibly satisfying. After years of putting myself last and sacrificing everything for them, I was finally standing up for myself. I know this will be a hard lesson for them, but they need to face the consequences of exploiting my hard work and taking advantage of my sacrifices. Since that call, I've had no further contact with my family, primarily because I've blocked them from my phone and social media. For the first time in ages, I'm living life on my terms, and it feels like an enormous weight has been lifted. Update 3. For those worried about my mom or Kiki showing up at my workplace, rest assured, I've already informed my boss about the situation, and a few coworkers are aware of how irrational and unpredictable my family can be. Everyone has been incredibly understanding and supportive of what I've been through. If Kiki does show up at my job to cause trouble, it would give me the perfect reason to file a police complaint, which wouldn't look great on her record. For her own sake, I hope she doesn't cross that line. As for how they're managing without food or money, honestly, I don't know, and at this point, I don't care. Perhaps they have some of the money left from what they took to pay for the retreat, or maybe they've figured out another way to get by. They're adults with a house to live in, so they aren't completely without resources. Maybe they'll finally get jobs or reach out to other family members for help. Whatever they do, it's no longer my problem. I've spent years taking care of them, sacrificing my well-being in the process. It's time for them to fend for themselves. And I've made my decision to move forward with my own life. Update 4. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I've received messages from many of you asking how I'm doing, so here I am to share what's happened. Lately, life has been going really well. After months of saving while living with my friend, I finally moved into my own place. It's not large, but it's mine, and that's what matters. Now that I have a place of my own, I've started saving for a car again, something I've always dreamed of. As for updates on Mom and Kiki, they did attempt to reach out a few months ago. One evening they showed up at my office. I'll admit, seeing them there caught me off guard. Mom looked absolutely exhausted. Her eyes were sunken, and she seemed like she hadn't slept in days. She ran straight to me, crying and begging me to come back home with them. While I wanted to feel sympathy for her, I stayed firm and told her no. I explained that I couldn't return to that environment. Mom continued to cry, acting as though she couldn't comprehend my decision. Kiki, on the other hand, wasted no time blaming me for abandoning them. She described how hard their lives had become, as if all of it were my fault. She insisted that I needed to stop playing games and come back home, claiming they'd already learned their lesson. Kiki even said she was now ready to get a job and earn money, just like I had always wanted her to. Mom then played the emotional card, saying Dad would be disappointed in me for walking away and that he would have wanted us to stick together. I calmly but firmly replied that I believed Dad would actually be proud of me for walking away and cutting my losses. I wasn't going to let them pull me down anymore. I explained how much better my life had become without them constantly asking for money or expecting me to fix their problems. I told them it was wrong to show up at my workplace without respecting my boundaries. I reminded them that I had explicitly cut them off and made it clear that I wasn't returning home. I also warned them that if they pulled a stunt like this again, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me back into a situation where I was taken for granted. In the end, they left begrudgingly, but before they walked away, Kiki still had the audacity to ask me for a few $100s, one last time. I refused. That was the last time I saw them in person. Since that encounter, there has been no further contact. However, I've heard through friends in my old neighborhood that Kiki still hasn't found a proper job. Meanwhile, Mom is working at a local diner to support them. It breaks my heart that Kiki is selfish enough to let our mother do all the work. On top of that, Kiki has moved her current boyfriend into their house. Apparently, this guy does have a job and isn't entirely freeloading, so at least he's providing some stability. If he's helping out, they should have a bit of financial security now. Regardless, this will be my final update about my family.